Hi everyone, here's the book chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing Erasure by Percival Everett. Last year, after it won every literary prize out there, I read James by Everett, and while it didn't quite sweep me off my feet, it was clearly a great achievement of a novel, it was clearly a great work, and it definitely left me curious to explore more of Everett's quite wide oeuvre. I decided to read Erasure because it was mentioned quite a lot in reviews to another book that I read recently, Victim by Andrew Boriga. And I was curious to see how the novels compared. I was curious to see if Boriga's novel is really so in such depth to Erasure as some reviewers made it out to be. And I would say that yes, the parallels are obvious. It's a clear case of if you enjoyed one, you're probably going to enjoy the other. They're both books that engage with the ways you can play the game of intellectual life to tap into current trends in the market and to feed readers the types of narratives that they want to read, exploiting perhaps their perception of your own self, especially your own self as a minority writer. But they're also very different books in many ways. Erasure surprised me even before I reached its first word. It surprised me from the copyright page. I was quite surprised to see that it actually came out as early as that. It's a novel from 2001. I say I'm surprised because it showed up in bookshops all over the UK last year, maybe a couple years back, probably because of its movie adaptation, American Fiction, and because of the success of James and some other recent Everett novels that made it come back in the limelight. And I was also surprised by quite how quirky a novel Erasure is, very clearly from the very beginning. Much more experimental than I was expecting. I wouldn't say that this is a postmodernist book or that it's written in that vein. If anything, it's clearly a novel that pokes fun at postmodernism. At one point in the book, there's this drunk, obnoxious writer who starts shouting the opening lines of Gravity's Rainbow. But it's still very much a self-conscious book, one that engages very much with the world of intellectual life, academia, publishing, all of these concerns that are going to resonate with readers of a certain temperament and that maybe come slightly in the way of just writing an engaging, engrossing, relatable novel. To put it differently, the novel came out originally with a university press. It's that type of work of fiction, and I'm not surprised that it did. In fact, the key element of Erasure's plot is precisely the fact that Monk, its protagonist, a professor and writer, is forced by the vicissitudes of his life into writing a popular novel because he needs the money. He's in a place in his life where he just needs to make money quickly. And he does so in spite of his best self. He decides to do it, he decides to try it. And very quickly this book, this creation, comes alive and escapes his control very much as a ink and paper Frankenstein monster. What complicates this already rather murky scenario is the racial element that's quite important to Monk's story. Monk is an African-American writer who writes fairly, as I said, fairly experimental, I want to say cold, abstract books, and he's always pressured by his agent, by other writers, into talking about the African-American experience, which is something that surprises him because he thought he already was. As an African-American writer, he was writing African-American books. And the book that he ends up writing to make this money that he needs is very much an exploitative novel that talks about the gritty reality of street life in the explicit way that readers wish for and come to expect. It's a book about life in the projects, about life in the dangerous neighborhoods of a big city, about gun violence, about abuse, and beyond. Monk is basically exploiting something that he himself despises, the appetite of certain readers, certain supposedly enlightened liberal readers, for true stories of grit. That really supposedly shine a light on what they think is the African American experience. Victim plays a similar game, as I mentioned before, where the protagonist of that novel makes a career for himself by feeding readers, progressive readers, the social justice stories, the stories of systemic oppression and racism and injustice that they've come to expect. It gives them what they think, what they assume is the true experience of in his case, a Latino man living in America, even when it's actually quite different from the reality of his own lived experience. In both novels, and let's focus on Erasure, the dilemma is quite obvious. Why isn't Monk allowed to make money writing his rewritings of Greek tragedy? Why isn't there a market for that? Why are those types of books supposed to be the domain of white people alone? Why is there such an appetite for these stories in readers, especially white readers? What is that telling us about the cultural sphere in America, in the broader world? Erasure is a very peculiar novel. It's much more playful than I was expecting. A good chunk of it, the actual novel that Monk writes and that you get to experience in full in the course of the book, feels like a joke that I'm not supposed to laugh at, and that anyway stops being funny quite fast because it's so protracted and so extreme. The relationships between the characters all feel a little stunted. Monk's relationship with his siblings and his mother, definitely with his love interest and then his literary agent. But I don't think that's because of any lack of talent in Everett, far from it. I think that's the whole point. Monk is very much somebody who lives inside his own head, who chases these quite abstract intellectual ideas and pursuits, and is not really very good at interacting with others in a way that is maybe warm, maybe sympathetic. His ideas and ideals, to put it differently, often come in the way of his relationships with the other people in his life. I think what Erasure really excels at is being a satire of the intellectual and cultural world in the US. The chapters where Monk finds himself on the panel to decide the winner for a literary prize are quite amusing, actually. I would say hilarious at times. His attitude when he's reviewing all these books is quite refreshing, quite clear-eyed. The way he wishes he could be honest about them and stop pretending that they're all masterpieces and just accept them for the relatively mediocre works that they ultimately are. All of those are quite amusing passages. It's quite a quirky novel and quite a quirky literary game, in the same way, I guess, as James is also quite a complex and quirky literary game. But when I say quirky, I would say that it falls in a literary tradition that is different from that of the quirky novels I tend to review on this YouTube channel. It's not really following in the footsteps of, say, the postmodern novels of the 60s and 70s. It feels as if it harks back to a previous satirical tradition. It's perhaps more in the vein of Mark Twain, to use a simple comparison, definitely than in the vein of, I don't know, Angela Carter or Thomas Pynchon. I've enjoyed it. I found it quite surprising. And I've been comparing it to James a little. The truth is, I still haven't figured out what type of writer Percival Everett is, and it's quite possible that some of the conclusions I've drawn in my review of Erasure maybe are slightly misguided, and if these are exceptions in his brother Hoover, please let me know. If these are quite emblematic of the type of fiction he writes, also similarly, please let me know. And feel free to suggest what else I should be reading of his. I think I'll read The Trees at some point, maybe next year. And yeah, Erasure. If you're curious about, if you want to read about the trappings of race within the cultural world, the way the expectations other people put on us trap us into boxes and force us into uncomfortable situations, it's a novel that explores those dynamics beautifully, and it's a very curious and interesting game. Let me know what you thought of it. Let me know if you're a big Everett fan, if it's among his best books or not. Look forward to discussing the novel in the comment section. Thanks for watching the review. Thank you to my patrons for supporting the YouTube channel, and bye everybody.